Welcome to panel discussion. These 2 days witnessed some nail-biting debate rounds. A young girl brigade left no stone unturned to enunciate their thoughts and beliefs, and it is their enthusiasm that has made this event a huge success. Kudos to each one of you who participated. These young girls make us realize that women have come a long way and they have all the reasons to celebrate their accomplishments, especially when their long standing efforts for equal treatment in the workplace have borne some fruits. In nearly every field that was once a male domain, women are establishing a strong presence. Nonetheless, women still continue to encounter challenges when it comes to advancing in the workplace. All these challenges are not new. To discuss about how far we still need to go and how to make sure that we get what we deserve, we have distinguished panelists among us who will be presenting their perspective on the topic for discussion today, the quarantine model, challenges for women at work. And it gives me great pleasure to announce our first panelist, Dr. Jyoti M. Pathania. An academician and analyst with over 20 years of teaching and research experience in various universities, to include Symbiosis University, Jivaji University, Jammu University, St. Xavier's, and Amity University. A doctorate in political science, she graduated in political science honors from Lady Shriram College, Delhi University, earned her MA and MPhil degree in international politics from School of International Studies, JNU. She also acquired advanced master degree in peace and conflict resolution studies from European Peace University. Currently, she is senior fellow and chairperson outreach at Center for Land Warfare Studies, New Delhi. We welcome you, ma'am. Next, we have Ms. Rita Singh. With over 30 years of experience in education, she is the director of the Indirapuram Group of Institutions. She has a master's in mathematics, in education, and in business administration, and a certificate in multiple intelligences from Harvard. She has received a number of national and international awards in education, the most prominent being the CBSE National Award the last year from HRD Minister, and Woman of Excellence in Academia by Women Economic Forum. As consultant with British Council and Education Quality Foundation of India, she has associated with programs relating to mentoring of rural schools in UP districts by private schools. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us today. Next, we have Ms. Inayat Singh Kakkar. She is a qualitative researcher and public health practitioner working towards realizing the right to health. She's a member of various pan-India civil society groups and people's movements in India, with a focus on public health. A graduate of National Law University, Jodhpur, she diversified into the field of social work and activism after a post-graduation from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Thank you for joining us today. Next, we have Ms. Srishti Saxena. She's an alumnus of Loreto Convent, Delhi Kent, and Army Institute of Law, Mohali. She's a lawyer by profession with over 9 years of work experience and is presently working in Goods and Services Tax Network. She has varied experience in litigation and working in government departments such as Ministry of Law and Justice. She's a keen legal writer and has a number of publications to her name. She has published articles on Aadhaar and protection of employees' data by companies in Foreign Journal and website. We welcome you, ma'am. Next, we have Dr. Harshita. PhD is Science C in the Defense Institute of Psychological Research, Defense Research and Development Organization, Ministry of Defense, Government of India. She's an alumnus of University of Delhi and has done BA Honours, MA and PhD in Psychology from University of Delhi. For her doctoral research, she has worked in the area of planning interventions for children with dyslexia. She specializes in the area of clinical psychology, personality assessment, and personnel selection. Presently, she's contributing in research projects pertaining to resilience building for Indian Armed Forces soldiers, development of psychological tests for selection of armed forces personnel, and other research projects for the Indian Armed Forces and paramilitary forces. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, ma'am. Last but not the least, we have Ms. Vipasha Malhotra. Vipasha Malhotra is a 23-year-old Delhi-based musician and comedian. After pursuing her graduation in mass communication from VIPS IP University, she entered into the field of performance and playback. from recording ad jingles for brands like Radio Mirchi, Times of India, and Google, to performing at the biggest music events across India, her musical journey has seen it all. She also happens to be an avid YouTuber and has a bunch of viral videos out there. Thank you so much, Vipasha, for joining us today. And for all those who have joined us live, you may feel free to ask any questions that you have for our panelists. You can drop your questions in the YouTube comment section. Now, I would request Ms. Akriti and Mr. Christie to please take over and commence with the panel discussion. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Jasleena. Thank you very much. A very warm welcome to all the panelists and viewers. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion. Just like you, even we wish to watch the final debate live in action. However, that is not quite possible in light of the current scenario. But you may rest assured that the Behest team would be uploading a recording of the finals on the YouTube page. In the meanwhile, we have put together this well-rounded panel for you. Just a reminder, if you wish to ask the panelists a question pertinent to the theme, please feel free to drop them in the chat section, and we will try our best to take up as many questions as we can before we wrap up the session for today. Christy, would you like to kickstart this discussion with the introduction of the theme and the first question for our panelists?
Yes, please. Thank you, Ms. Akriti Mehta. I'll just get right to it without much ado. The explicit bias towards women is evident in them being perceived as nurturing, parenting, and supporting individuals. On the other hand, when people think of leaders, the attributes that come to mind are strong, assertive, aggressive, largely considered to be male attributes. For most people, women have no association with leadership behavioral patterns. They are considered as the weaker sex. With the world controlled by the pandemic and the workforce largely shifted to the domain of the space traditionally called home, instances of increased household responsibility, domestic violence, and psychological torturing have come to the fore. Keeping in mind the ongoing pandemic, countries like Taiwan, New Zealand, Germany, and Iceland have flattened the curve to achieve a state of normalcy. What these countries have in common, apart from an overwhelmingly successful response to the pandemic, are women at the helm. They have done much, much better at controlling the virus and have lifted the lockdown sooner, thereby hastening economic recovery compared to other countries. How important is the gender element in this analysis? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'll take up the question. I feel all these years, women have been multitasking. It has probably because of the kind of environment they were thrown in, whether they were working or not working, whether it was even if the housewives who were at home, they were kind of handling so many relationships. They were always the hub, the center of all the relationships in the family and extended family, talking about it. And then added to that, there was a home management. I'm not even talking about working women right now. The home management added to it. They were always very good multitaskers. As a result, now what you mentioned about how those countries where we have leaders as women leaders at helm, probably looking at the complete picture, looking at the problem in its totality has always been forte of women. Probably because of that, this is my take on the whole situation. Probably because of that, the leaders who are there have probably done better. So COVID management, country management, handling the crisis of the country while you're running the country, all that has probably been handled a little better in those countries where women are at the helm, probably because of this trait that I have in my life experienced and because of the reasons that I mentioned.
Thank you, Ms. Rita, for your input. Dr. Harshita, we would love to hear your input as well.
Yeah, and thank you. So I'll focus on the last statement or the question that was posed as a part of this a very informative question, also very insightful. Firstly, I would like to appreciate the kind of question that was posed. So now coming back to the last line, that was actually the question of the entire this thing. How important is the gender element in this pandemic? I think it's very, very important. Of course, like ma'am has already brought out the forte of women in handling this crisis, but I feel there is a flip side also to this entire situation. That is the ill effect of the pandemic. A lot of researchers are referring to it as the shadow pandemic, which is particularly the domestic violence and the issues that women are facing, they are subjugated to at the domestic front. So I think there are a lot of articles and a lot of examples which can be quoted, which highlight how this pandemic, of course, has affected everyone's social, cultural, economic life, but it also has a gender component, because simply so because women are facing greater difficulties in addition to what the pandemic has posed. One is definitely domestic violence, like I already pointed out. The other one is the especially for the working women, how things have become more difficult for them, because in addition to the work that they are doing, the daily chores that have to be managed at home, taking care of the children, taking care of the aged, everything is resting on their shoulders, thanks to the traditional and the gender biased roles that we have, especially with regard to the household. Additionally, like all of us know, the number of cases that have risen in terms of domestic violence. Why that has happened is naturally because now the things that were happened, they have multiplied a lot more, because there is no provision for seeking help or reporting, or seeking outside support for these women who were already subjugated possibly to a lot of such issues. So everything has multiplied many folds for women. So naturally, I would say yes, there is a gender component, um, in the positive and in the negative sense as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harshita. Dr. Patania, would you like to add something?
Yeah, certainly. You know, the role of women in leadership is something which has not been properly accepted, not merely by the world, but also with regard to the societal system which is prevalent in our country, which is patriarchal. Now, if you know, the World Health Organization report of 2019, the working paper was published, where it said that out of 104 countries, 70% of the workers in the health and in the social sector were women. So women constitute two-thirds of the global health force, and yet see how much is the gendered inequality. As you yourself pointed out in the beginning of the discussion, the countries where the leaders are women at the helm of affairs, they have contributed more to the societal, to the humanitarian, as well as to the health considerations. So where women are concerned, even the United Nations Organization 2 decades back in 2020, they passed a resolution which was known as United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. And what did it say? It said that it was a landmark resolution at that time, and it was that women must participate in security, in peace debate, in building, in prevention of conflicts, and in relief and recovery, especially in situations which we are facing now. So, keeping that in mind, let me tell you, it is a sad truth, but this in peace building, in prevention and recovery, especially keep that in mind. Let me tell you, it is truth, but despite the UN Security Council.
Thank you, Dr. Patania. Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Harshita. Dr. Harshita, this question is keeping in mind what you talked about just now. So in India, traditionally, the men happen to be breadwinners, while women are deemed to be homemakers. With time, women have been inching away from this role that seems to have been imposed on them without actually asking them whether taking care of the chores at home is something they would like to do or not. While womankind might have enjoyed a sense of independence from social norms in the past couple of decades, the ongoing pandemic poses its own set of problems, just as you saw. For someone from the working class with a family at home, one of two things happen at their home. Either everyone chips in to relieve their load since the domestic help does not come around, or everyone takes her for granted, right? Hence, they have nothing, to add to it. So, which further adds on to the working mother's load, basically. So, my question is, how can we ensure that the pandemic era domestic work is being divided more equitably?
Right. Thank you for the question. So my counter questions to all of us would be that why do we have this question in mind in the first place? That is primarily because domestic work, daily chores of the house, looking after the house, washing the dishes, and all of that is why is it considered to be a gender specific task? We need to firstly understand and also now see whatever is happening at the moment. There has to be a lot of debate within the family that can obviously take care of what is happening in the present situation. But what I personally feel is that it has to be an ongoing process. It doesn't stop here, right? Once things get better with regard to the pandemic, so it has to be an ongoing process where we keep questioning these things, and we keep modeling the right thing for the younger generation. Now coming back to what I was discussing initially, so we need to understand that daily chores are a basic life skill. They are not a gender specific task. The moment we understand this, I think a lot of things become better. So we need to delineate now because things are changing. What used to happen earlier, like you rightly pointed out, was that the division of labor was very clear. So one goes out, one is the breadwinner, and now one used to stay back and take care of the house. That was fair, but whatever the reasons may be for different people to choosing to work now, as a matter of fact, when the income comes, the entire family benefits from that also. So one cannot say that it's the choice of the woman to work. So she is doing out of her own choice, and hence what she's supposed to do at home also remains to be her responsibility. So one is that we need to understand that basic life skills, these are basic life skills and not gender specific roles. Now, with regard to families who are already in this situation, I think a lot is resolved through communication. People who are already facing issues in this regard, they need to understand that the only way out of any crisis situation is communication. Express yourself. For women who are facing some situations which are similar to this, please express yourself, discuss these issues with your family members, be it your children, be it your husband or anyone else in the family. You need to have an open space for discussion where you address such issues. A lot of times because we don't speak up and we don't come out openly and tell the other what we are feeling, more often than not things go unnoticed and taken for granted. So please speak up and discuss and communicate. Second thing is, of course, you need to, like I mentioned, have, once you discuss what is whose work and try and demarcate things. Second thing is, if you feel that if things are going out of control, and this is particularly for women, please seek help. Naturally, visiting help centers is not possible, or visiting counselors is not possible, but then you can definitely utilize technology, discuss whether it be with a friend of yours or with a counselor, but please seek help if you think that things are getting too much for you to handle. Thirdly, you can also have an open communication with your employers. More often than not, what happens is that of course it depends from person to person, but a lot of times the employers are also considerate, so there may be some leeways that can be given in, or some accommodation can be made in with regard to the nature of work or the work timings that are being decided for the employees. But most important is communication. Please speak up and express yourself. That's the only way to solve crisis situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harshita. That was very well phrased, especially towards the end. I believe Vipasha Malhotra, you would like to add something, please. Could you please unmute yourself, Vipasha? I think you're still muted. Yeah.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. So I wanted to add to what Dr. Harshita said, that it's really important to communicate, but also at the same time, I feel like women have to express themselves a lot, and it ends up adding up to like a sort of managerial labor, like wherein let's say there are some tasks which are kind of like you don't need to every time tell someone or remind someone that you need to do this or you need to do that, whenever it comes to like household chores or like shared chores like that, with which everyone is benefiting. So like every time that they have to assign someone that task or they have to remind them that you need to do this and you need to do that, I think that also adds to a lot of managerial labor and stress and just all of these issues. So I think it's really important for everyone in the family to take initiative on their own. Even if they want to assign certain tasks, they can take out one time of the day where they decide, okay, these are definite tasks that I decide to take up. But yeah, definitely I think that whenever women are supposed to communicate everything, and they are expected ki nahi, you assign us, you tell us whenever I need to fill the water bottles, or you are supposed to remind me. So I think that also creates a lot of pressure on the woman. Yeah.
Thank you, Vipasha. Ms. Shrishti Saxena, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Harshita in the sense when she said that gender roles have been assigned in the society not during the pandemic, but they have always existed in the society, and how we've gone about functioning. Even when women were going to office, they were doing their household chores and then going to office, coming back and doing their household chores. So this is something we need to consciously work on, that household roles are not associated with just women. We need to divide the work, and also we need to raise the next generation well. The next generation needs to understand that these are, like Dr. Harshita said, that these are life skills which everyone should know. Like cooking is something which everyone should know. It is not a gender specific role. If a man is staying alone, he also needs to cook, he needs to survive. So we need to do this. That's about. Thank you.
Agreed. Dr. Patania, would you like to share some insight?
Yes, I liked the title of your program, which said Quarantine Model. And I was, I was thinking that I was just thinking, can we actually have a model which can be accepted by all of us? Can we have a basic model, quarantine model, especially for the women? So it's very difficult, and it's a very complex and complicated question. So for me, I would add just three things as a quarantine model. One, adaptability. You've got to adapt yourself to the new normal. What is the new normal? The family is in the house most of the time. That includes your children and your husband. If he's not in the government service, he too is in the house. So how do you distribute work? Like Shushi said, division of labor is not only in terms of factory workers, but it is also in our household chores. These are the testing times, and I strongly believe, and this is my second analysis, that in such trying times of crisis, the woman gets even more stronger. And thirdly, as I said, the best comes out of a crisis situation. The woman, as well as the men, I would like to say, would come out stronger and more committed. Thirdly and finally, women should be accepted by society as equal partners, as equal people, along with the men folk. The minute the society has this acceptance, I think the society itself will progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patania. Ms. Inayat Singh Kakkar, I believe you would like to share something as well.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So actually, I wanted to also go back to the first question, and I wanted to start off with some great international statistics that Dr. Jyoti had brought forward.
about the contribution of women to the international workforce. Now, even in India, there was a periodic labor force survey that was done in, I think, 2018, 19 or 17, 18, which brought forth that 85% of our Indian public health workforce are actually women. But if you compare that with the kind of leadership positions that women are in as far as public health and medicine is concerned, you will find that there aren't a lot of women in leadership positions. Now, a profession like nursing, where traditionally there are, many more number of women who provide nursing services. When you look at the national level unions or associations of nurses, a lot of the leadership positions are unfortunately again occupied by men. In Mumbai, nursing associations and unions have been demanding with the government, that there needs to be a forum that needs to be created where women leaders, women nursing leaders in particular, can come forth and participate in decision making. Again, looking at the health workforce as well, there are hierarchies. Now, the majority of the workforce that we find that does all the on-ground work, that is ASHA workers and ANMs, are all women. And unfortunately, these are women who don't have, regularized pay. They don't have any sort of social support, but they are always, the frontline providers when it comes to any and every health issue. The second thing I wanted to focus on, I actually want to step back and talk a little bit about, gender and what we define as gender. And what we define as gender as a category. Now, gender is not a homogeneous category. It is, there are intersectionalities even within gender. There are intersectionalities of class, there are intersectionalities of caste, there are intersectionalities of, different kind of socioeconomic things. When we talk about, when you look at the public messaging that has been there around, women and particularly working during the pandemic, a lot of it has focused on working from home. But when you look at the actual numbers, it is only 4 to 5% of the women who can even afford to work from home. There is very little focus that has actually happened on how to support domestic workers, for whom it is not possible to work from home. It is common knowledge that domestic workers have not been paid by a lot of the employers. Unfortunately, a lot of these employers are also women. So gender itself is not a homogeneous, category. You look at sanitation workers, you look at migrant women, you look at women farmers. So even, even within gender, we need to address some of these differences that arise. And understand that, a lot of the solutions that are given are oftentimes solutions focusing on only one particular class of women. So, for example, technology and telemedicine, which is coming up in a big way. Unfortunately, a large majority of women don't have access to the internet or to services or products that can actually enable them to connect to these kind of services. So even there is a danger that you will leave out a large, number of women who require services, because sometimes we don't think in terms of, these intersectional angles, and because we think from very, straight sort of lines.
Thank you for sharing some valuable insight, Ms. Inayat Singh Kakkar. Ms. Rita Singh, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, actually, the conversation was going on a different angle at that point of time when Harshita and Shishri was speaking. That is when I wanted to kind of add on. However, I'm happy that I'm speaking after Inayat because she brought in a very different, I would say, a wider perspective to the entire situation. So good that we are not just talking about the domestic part of what is household chores that we were talking about. Now we look at the women's role in a bigger perspective. And what I wanted to bring to the fore was wherever let's just come to the household situation right now. In a particular household, where the problems were, where the roles were not very well defined to begin with. Either the roles were set wrongly, or we had too much of household, the domestic help otherwise coming from outside. when there was too much of domestic help coming from outside, you simply, a lady or guy, whoever was handling the household management, house management, would simply had to kind of manage, simply had to allot work or designate work and kind of carry on. The role of the lady, or generally the lady, as the Indian setup was only to manage how the house ran, and you only had to give instructions to the domestic helps. When it all stopped coming to a place, when the the entire chores came into the hands of the family, that is where the strength of the family, the core values of the family, or the feeling for one another actually was brought to the fore. Did you feel for your mother? Did you feel for your wife? Did you feel for your sister? Do you understand how much stress they are taking? How much of work are they taking? Did you really understand how much of... So I think this particular pandemic brought to the fore what was already existing, which should have paid attention to even prior to this. So suddenly the entire focus came into seeing those who had sensitivity to understand, understood. Those who did not, probably the whole scenario changed into the domestic violence and other stresses, not just for the lady, for the entire household, etc. Coming to the domain that I work in, it's education sector, and of course it is primarily women, and their roles, their work time is somehow overlapping with the kids' work time or kids' study time. So there is more stress coming into scene. What Inayat brought out very beautifully, that we just don't have to think of a family. She talked about the various fields, whether it was the health workers or various fields she covered, and she talked about it. The sensitivity, the lack of sensitivity within the relationship of, the lady who's hired domestic help versus this. So all those things, the sensitivity was wherever the sensitivity, there's a lack of sensitivity, that is where the whole scenario has turned ugly, whether family setup or a relationship. We have always been talking about women not being paid fairly. I mean, there was a discrimination for the same role. I mean, women have been talking about it, fighting for it and things like that. But there is a flip side to the whole situation. In the entire, if you see the statistics of layoffs, the layoffs have been more to the highly paid people, and it has not really been for the people who are moderately paid. So the whole scenario is very, very different. We have to understand, and we are going to innovate in the situation. I mean, that's all I have to say now. I mean, I'll catch up later with you people.
Thank you for sharing your valuable perspective. Moving on, Ms. Shrishti Saxena, based on your legal expertise, I have just the question for you. Just a moment. It is a known fact that once a woman bears a child, there needs to be a well-rounded support system for her, from her family and even from the workplace. But incidents of lack of such support for females are plenty. This binary is getting strengthened with the quarantine model of work into effect, with women expected to bear the entire burden of household chores and childcare. And women too sometimes buy into the patriarchy in small ways. How may one fight these odds? What is the legal community's role in this fight? Is enough legal recourse available to fight these stereotypes?
Well, this question is actually very close to my heart since I have a very young child. And when it comes to the legal recourse, if you see the Maternity Benefit Act, it gives you 6 months of leave as maternity leave, which is women's right. But the problem, there can be no harm to a lady during the maternity period. The employer cannot act against the female. But the problem that arises is that these are all written. There is actually very little access. Firstly, there is little information about it. I'm a lawyer, so I know about these things. But this kind of information is not available to every worker. And by worker, I don't mean sitting in companies. I mean at the grassroots level. So they don't know this information. And most of the times, employers actually take advantage of this situation. I have always believed that there is a lot of legal recourse available, but the access to such legal recourse is a problem. for many women because of lack of knowledge, lack of financial resources, or the societal norms and pressures. So I think it is actually the duty of the employer to make women comfortable, and it is also the duty of their family to support the woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krishti. Thank you so much. Moving on, my next question is for Ms. Rita Singh. Many women are different at work and at home. However, in the current scenario, when work from home seems to be the norm, the lines between work and home have been blurred. The very same women who wield power and are leaders at the office, they take a back seat at home and subscribe to stereotypical behaviors that they reject in the office. Why do you think women succumb to the undue pressure at home? What is the reason?
I won't really say they succumb to a situation or anything. That's a role that was predefined when a guy and a girl get married. There are certain strengths with girl, there are certain strengths with boy. I'm not trying to gender stereotyping or anything. It all depends on what is your strength. One could be good at finances, other could be good at aesthetics and doing the house beautifully, the other could be good at cooking. It's a very personal space, and it is a definition that they define for themselves. It's in a relationship. Nobody who comes from outside can decide how's this lady doing this or how's this guy cooking and things like that. That is one thing I'm very clear in my mind. It is very, very personal decision of a couple. Now, when the family grows bigger, when the children coming in, it's again the adult's decision to how much to involve these children and how each one takes the role of whatever the place has to, the family has, whatever commitments they have. So how have you actually structured your family to begin with? The role is, it's as much a responsibility of a guy as it is of a girl, because the family is comes out, it's revolving around two of them. This is one thing. Now, coming back to work specific that you talk about, if your work was well defined, if your relationships are fine, things do not have problem. I mean, you would have, in the pandemic, people would have redefined their roles, and when the maids stopped coming, or whether a different situation when their online shopping started happening, whatever, people kind of got into their roles, and you fitted your jigsaw pieces in the puzzle in a right way. Okay, Christy does this better, Inaya does this better, and Rita does this better, and then the friction came in when there was lack of communication, and it was not really well structured, even if a change in structure that was happening. If you were a teacher, I'm coming specific to my domain, where the kind of people that I have, of course, there are administrative workers, but the percentage of staff in administration versus the people who are teaching are much more in our setup. So I'll talk about teachers in particular. When a teacher was out of house for say 6 hours or 7 hours, otherwise, and suppose the guy was in a say software engineer or whatever, and he was spending time as close to 9 to 10 hours. So there is this 3 hours extra for a lady in the house. She would have taken little more on herself. And if it is not the situation now, if everybody's working from home, I'm sure little shifting of workload would have happened in, again, sensible households, where the relationship was alive, right, and respecting one another. So I feel the stress that a teacher is feeling, it's not related to more work at home. It is related to less gadgets at home, I would say. Probably the child is also seeking the gadget to study because his lessons are being imparted. If there are 2 people, did you actually have 4 smartphones or 4 laptops or 4 PCs? Is it good to have a small screen being watched by a child? Mother would probably forego a laptop for his kid because she doesn't want her child to be watching smaller screen. So all these lack of gadget, and the entire lockdown and entire pandemic came, it did not really give us a breather. It came too suddenly, and all those people who were feeling lost are the ones who probably could not redefine their life fast enough. It's like a rate of change. If it is faster than the rate of absorption, that creates stress for you. So those families which have probably felt it, have experienced this, have felt the stress. And it is all in your hands. Whether you get stressed or you redistribute your work, it is all in your hands. I mean, if I mean, somebody mentioned, Harshita, or somebody mentioned about the communication. This is the time. It always is. Communication is the key to solving any problem. This is the time, and this should be communication must be there maximum. That's very important. What?
Thank you, Mrs. Singh, for underlining the importance of communication. Now, Ms. Inayat, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you. I think that the problem is bigger. I think that the problem lies in our societal structures. I think the problem lies in the way we socialize children from a very young age. And I think the problem lies in how we bring up children. So, for example, girls are always taught to be nurturing and caring, and girls are taught to compromise. And this reflects, in very deep ways in society. I mean, so if you look at the nutrition status of women tends to be worse than their own family members, and that happens because women often eat the last. Women consume less dairy and less protein because these are things that are reserved for men and the boys. So this is a problem that starts at a very early age. Last night I was watching this Netflix show. It's all the rage right now, seemingly. It's called Indian Matchmaking, and it's a show about it's a show that sort of really reflects what our society expects from men and women. Now the entire conversation in the show, when they're talking to women, is that you need to compromise and you can't have these expectations, and this woman is too set in her ways. So to contrast, there's this one and these are stories of real people. So there's this one woman contestant who has very fixed ideas of what she wants in a partner, and she takes time, and she doesn't accept the first guy that the matchmaker throws at her. And the matchmaker, who's also a woman, her reaction to that is that she's too picky, and like this she will never find anybody and she must adjust. But on the other hand, there is this other male participant who has rejected, in the show they say, about 80 to 100 to 150 women. And somehow the conversation on him rejecting women is not as negative, and he's not perceived to be troublesome in that sense. So I think that's where the problem begins, and I think because of that, the kind of negotiation space that women have at home is very less, because there are some things that are just expected of you. One of my friends, she often tells us about her boss, who is a woman, and she has a child. She has a small child, and these are people who are working from home. So she said, I see my boss replying to emails only after 12 in the night, because the whole day she is busy with her child, and it is only once the child goes to bed that she is able to do this. And I think I think it also depends on the kind of marriage that you've had, the kind of say that you've had in choosing your partner, whether you can really even have that space to communicate, and whether you can have that space to talk to your partner. And it also depends on your partner himself or themselves. And coming back to the domain that I work in, that is public health. Now we look at nurses, you look at ASHA workers, you look at ANMs. These are frontline workers who are working day and night. Now nurses have been fighting for the longest time, because they say that the state doesn't support us adequately, because we have family responsibilities. We have to take care of our children, we have to take care of our household. And how do we do this when we are at the front line? ASHA workers similarly, they don't have fixed work timings like probably we do. They don't have a 9-to-5 schedule. They work round the clock, as and when the need arises. If there's a pregnant woman who needs to be taken to a health center, she will go. So, there is a lack of institutional support overall that women face in terms of, lesser childcare, reduced services that could actually help them take the burden off their hands. And unfortunately, the way Indian society has progressed, the ideal bahu today has become the woman who also goes out and is fantastic at her work, but when she comes home, she's also the perfect housewife. And I think that has really added to the pressure that women face.
Thank you, Inayat. You just made me appreciate the privilege that I am blessed with, a privilege that once I was oblivious to. But okay, moving on, Dr. Harshita, would you like to add something here?
Yeah. Firstly, I mean, after listening to Inayat, I mean, a few points came to my mind, and she's beautifully brought out the importance of the entire concept of how identities, gender identities, and roles are construed, and that is the larger problem. And what we are seeing now is a manifestation of that larger problem. Right. So, in this regard, I have just one thing to add specifically in the context of working women. So, you see how a man's career is his job is everybody's responsibility. So, you have a normal discourse that all of us are privy to, that, when your father goes to office, or when he's stressed out, when he comes back from, work, or he's had a tough day. So, what is the general discourse in the family that goes on? It's okay, don't trouble Papa. He's had a tough day. Especially for the woman, she's expected to bear with the tantrums of the man who's had a tough day at work, because his success and his failure a lot depends on the kind of support he's getting at home naturally, and especially from the wife. You have cliches like behind every successful man is a woman. Now you see how these things slowly and slowly creep into the psyche and add to the burden on the women, the spouse, the lady in the house, that so someone else's success and failure also depends on me, so now I'm responsible for that also. And whereas when you see a woman, her job is her problem. So she is not allowed to go to office, have a bad day at work, come back a little stressed out, and that I mean, it's a food for thought. So do we have the same dialogues in the family, that don't trouble her, let her be, she's had a tough day, let's all support her? Do we have that sort of setup at home, for the working women, whatever be the career or the line that the woman is in terms of her field? But do we have a similar discourse like that? So I think a lot needs to be changed. And in this regard, social media has a lot of role to play. Like, I was just going through these memes and the jokes that go around in WhatsApp and Facebook and other platforms. So what they're doing with regard to the pandemic, so how they portray is that they'll make funny memes on men doing the household chores, right? And how frustrated they are because they are trapped inside the house. And for women, they are upset because they are not able to go to the parlors, and they are not able to get their basic stuff done. So that is a matter of humor or joke and concern, joke or humor for people. So what I urge young people also who are watching this, and parents, that the discourse has to change. How you address, or how you put forth the concerns of yourself and of others, how you, again, the role of sensitivity is very important. How you are sensitive to the other person's position and difficulties that they are facing, that is very, very important. And it's extremely important to support the woman's career also, equally as important as it is a man's career. So that sort of a support has to be there at home. Otherwise, definitely it'll be a stressful bargain for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harshita and Dr. Patania. Yes, please.
All right. My counter question to the panelists who just spoke before me was, who is the one who says that dad has to go to work? Please let him do his work properly. Do not disturb him. It is the woman herself. So I think until and unless the woman herself tries and educate the family members that not only the father's work but the mother's work is also equally important, and that professionally both have to be taken care of, professionally both are sound professionals, and that the family has to look into both at an equal respect. I think that is where is important, because it is finding in the family, as we say, the first school of any child is the family. And woman is the core of the family. She is the foundation of the family. So the right education, the right grooming, and the right perspective has to be given by us, by we, the women. We are the most pertinent aspect of any society. So, in my opinion, social re-engineering has to be done, and I think pandering has to be done. The pandemic has given us an opportunity to do social re-engineering in our households, and that is a place where women, us, we can take the lead and set the house which is not in order. Thank you.
Well said, Dr. Pathania. Ms. Shrishti Saxena, is there anything you would like to add here?
So I was listening to the panelists before me, and one thing that came to my mind was that even in the workplace, women are seen that they are just doing work for their wish. It is not a necessity, or they don't want to work. So if a lady is getting married, she will always be asked, "Oh, will you continue working?" But if a man is getting married and it's the news in the office, nobody will ask, "Oh, will you continue working?" And similarly, if a lady is about to have a child, or the lady has a child, "Oh, will you be able to work? Will you continue working?" Similarly, a man will never be asked this question. So at the household level, the mindset has to change. And similarly, at the workplace also, those mindsets have to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Inayat, I believe you would like to wrap up this little discussion. Yes, please.
Okay, so I just wanted to say, I mean, what Dr. Jyoti said is absolutely correct. It is not, I mean, it is also women who are often the flag bearers of patriarchy. But I think what we also need to understand is that the woman who is traditionally, punished is also the woman who steps out of, who sort of dares to push the line and step beyond, what patriarchy dictates she can and cannot do. And I think to that extent, putting the burden of of changing family values, of redefining what family should be solely on women isn't fair, because patriarchy is a problem of both men and women. Men are also affected very badly by patriarchy, and therefore this social re-engineering, which I 100% agree with, is something that needs to happen by involving men. It needs to be led by men. Often, I mean, if you look at Facebook comment wars on gender, the problem is often that it is the women who are fighting, and there's very little support from men. And when men always tell women that you're playing the victim card, but it really matters when there is a man who steps in and says that, no, this is my problem as well, and I am equally complicit, and I also need to step in and address this. Now, I wanted to wrap this up by being a little bit provocative. I think sometimes these gendered roles also seep into our language and the way we talk about women. So, it's very common in Indian culture for women to be addressed as a lady. So you'll always talk about a man and a lady. Now, what is a lady? I mean, as a woman, I don't want to be a lady, because what is a lady? A lady is somebody who crosses her legs. A lady is somebody who is demure. A lady is somebody, who has these very feminine traits typically, and is expected to always be subservient, and perform these gendered roles. And I think sometimes it is our language that also betrays that our expectations of women and how we define women. So I would also say that there is a need for us to rethink the way we speak, the language that we use, the words that we use, and how that impacts the culture that we create.
All right. Thank you, Inayat. Moving on, the next question would be for you, Dr. Pathania. Let's talk about how, just a moment. Let's talk about how COVID-19 has had a gendered impact. This public health emergency has become a nightmare for female victims. Harassment has mostly escalated behind closed doors. It also happened during the 2014-2016 Ebola and 2015 and 2016 Zika epidemics. The National Commission for Women, NCW, has received thousands of calls for domestic violence across the country. What is sad is that the government barely addresses such gendered implications during epidemic outbreaks. How can we help people recognize the extent to which coronavirus pandemic affects women and men differently?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and that is a very pertinent question to our discussion today also. Now, you see, the NGOs, the non-governmental sector, is the sector which can play a very, very important role in these pandemic times. It is this particular sector, and I'm not just talking about the National Commission of Women. There are umpteen number of NGOs who are working for the domestic circus, for the domestic women who are undergoing domestic violence. So such NGOs in particular have to play not only a reactive role, but a proactive role in such a situation. And I totally agree that the government during such time, their main aim right now is to save lives. So your domestic household core and the violence with regard to it becomes a secondary issue. The primary issue remains saving lives. So, in this regard, not only the NGOs, but I guess even the social media to a large extent can play a greater role. Talks like these should be more in number. Talks on radio, FM, even the social media to a greater role. Talks like these, FM, ways of which can reach each and every household, and not only in the cities, but also in the villages. The panchayats can play a fantastic role here. The panchayats can call in people. You can't have a large gathering, but the panchayat leaders, through their ways of communication, can further percolate into the domestic systems of the households. So I guess NGOs, the social media, these are going to play a very, very important role in these pandemic times.
Thank you, Dr. Pathania. Ms. Inayat, would you like to share your insights, please?
If there's anybody who would like to go before, please do. I can also speak at the end.
Okay, Ms. Rita Singh, we would love to hear your input, ma'am.
So just adding to the points and few points, in terms of domestic violence, I remember a long time back, there was this campaign that was started, Ring a Bell. So if you hear somebody, you hear domestic incident at home, you're a neighbor, so you just ring a bell. So it gives that split second relief to that person. And she understands that, yes, there is somebody there who understands it. So it is somewhere as a community, we have to do this. So, and during this pandemic, imagine the plight of a woman that who has to stay in the house throughout 24/7 with the aggressor. So that is the kind of a community building. If you know that there is something happening, just go walk up to her, talk to her, just ring a bell. And these are the kind of campaigns that should start and should continue. And apart from that, there are so many other facilities that are being given to women, and women need to be educated about the aspects of law which are there to protect them, and that it can be through these mediums and at grassroots level through NGOs. And so we have to build up as a community and voice our opinion against it as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Srishti. Ms. Rita, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I agree to what Dr. Jyoti and then Srishti talked about, that community has to intervene and they are the ones who have to take this role in society, because each time when legal intervention is there or the government gives out an order, the order does not always help. Or sometimes it can be, if I remember when there was a whole lot of dowry deaths happening, I'm talking about my younger days, it's not, and luckily it is not really too much, in the problem is kind of eradicated to a certain extent, at least in urban places. When the law came in, 7 years of all those law came in, it was kind of twisted to the other side, and there were the whole lot of cases where it was taken adversely, and people really tried to twist that order or the law against certain families. What I'm trying to say is, if I talk about my own domain, there has been a situation like we all know, who have been aware and who have school-going children, etc., or who are either a parent or a teacher in a school, would know that there are a whole lot of fee issue that was happening in schools presently. And there were all those schools who had good relations with their parents, they could actually arrive at a midline solution that, okay, these are the parents who are government servant, they're getting their salaries, okay, they will keep paying, and that's okay, we will defer your fees. And the schools who had good relations with their through the community, through their own networking with the parents, through their own PTAs, through their own communication channel they have, which was alive with the parents, all depending on your relationship, they could solve the problem themselves. The moment it came as an order from government, okay, tuition fees only has to be paid, this has to be written off, this has to be done, that their teachers must be paid this much. There were a whole lot of schools which are budget schools who the owners and the teachers had such wonderful relationship that owners went ahead and told teachers that, okay, I'm giving you 50%, rest of the 50% is deferred. This I'm hoping that I'll pay by. So there was a mutual respect, mutual relationship, which handled the situation. When the orders came into scene, then it became a law and it became a compulsion. And that is where even the, I would say, people who were okay with the situation suddenly became people who were objecting to a situation, and the whole scenario became very ugly. So that is where the role of community comes into scene, whether to stop a domestic violence, talking about the again the ring the bell or whatever. I mean, I totally remember that campaign which was there in electronic media and everywhere, and I think it had its effect. People were actually going and ring the bell where they actually heard some noises from one of the families. So what we can do as people, by being observant, by feeling responsible towards society, and not having that attitude of Sanuki kind of attitude, I totally agree that we as people, we as society members can do much, much, much more what law or government can do.
Thank you, Ms. Rita. Thank you so much. Dr. Harshita?
Yeah, talking about, of course, Srishti has nicely brought out the importance of community's contribution, and that has to be there because the government initiatives cannot possibly reach, maybe, or sometimes they cannot reach the door to door level to provide help. But there are certain very creative, institutionalized government initiatives in different countries, especially in the time of pandemic, to deal with women who are suffering at homes. Some of the initiatives I would like to highlight, because while I was reading, I mean, it was really interesting to read the kind of, the way this issue is dealt with in different countries. So in France, the government has actually gone on to the extent of financing 20,000 reservations in a hotel for women who who run away from the house, if they are being abused at home, to seek shelter. So there are 20,000 hotel bookings for such women. Then they have this another concept of in Argentina as well, they have this concept of wearing a different sort of a mask, which is a pseudonym for seeking help. So when this woman wears a certain kind of mask and goes to maybe the pharmacy or nearby, or is seen around by the neighbors, everybody knows that, okay, she is in need of help. So so the community then steps in to provide the help to the woman who is possibly suffering at home. The other thing that people are doing in these countries, like I mentioned, in Spain and France particularly, so at different pharmacies and grocery stores, they have these booths installed specifically for women, who can call up the authorities from there, because oftentimes when women are trapped inside the house and they are trapped with their aggressor for longer periods of time, it's very possible that access to a phone or technology may not be available to her. So seeking help becomes difficult. So they've installed booths at different places where these women can go and call up or seek help. So I think a lot needs to be done from the government side also. One interesting thing that the one of the states in India has done is they've gone out with a social message for men to deal with the present situation, is that men shouldn't trouble their wives. with asking them to cook more dishes. So, don't trouble your wives with asking with more food, don't demand more food. So that's the least that one of the states has done in India. There's a lot that we need to do, giving out social messages, giving out more helpline options, and some creative ways like some other countries are already doing. I think these are also some things that we can also learn from, and definitely we must do something about it, not just as a community, but as an institution as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. We'll move to Mr. Nayak. Would you like to add something to the conversation?
Yes. So, all the amazing panelists have spoken about violence, and your question talks about the gendered impact. And because I work in health, I also just wanted to sort of bring in the point that, the gendered impact of the pandemic has also been that healthcare services which women access have greatly shrunk. A lot of large public hospitals have been converted into COVID-only facilities, and private hospitals functioning has been impacted because, the government initially had come out with this thing saying that, elective surgeries, etc., cannot be done. And services like abortion were initially included in the elective surgery, but later in mid-April, there was an order that came out that classified abortions as essential health services. And there have been a lot of orders saying that, essential services constituting maternity care, constituting reproductive and sexual health services, services like abortions should be included. But despite that, we've seen that the provision of these services has really shrunk. This has been because of factors on the demand side as well as the supply side. And I don't know if this question covers gendered aspects beyond domestic violence, but this is also a form of violence. So in Delhi we have a group called the Medical Support Group, and in this group we have doctors and public health professionals, and we've been working around the clock to help women access health services. And it has been such a challenge. We have seen women who have died because they have been shuttled from hospital to hospital with no hospital providing services. We have seen women, being afraid to go to hospitals because they don't know where are the services, where are the hospitals where the services are operational. And so this pandemic has seen a grave impact on women's health pertaining to nutrition, access to services. There are estimates, from studies that have been done that say that 8 lakh women, will access unsafe abortions during this time. The level of maternal mortality is expected to rise. The level of infant mortality is expected to rise. And these are also, things that the health system really needs to look at. And also, of course, the civil society really needs to step in and is already doing so in a big way.
Thank you, Mr. Nayak. This was exactly my next question to you, that how in several countries the provision of sexual and reproductive health services, including prenatal and maternal care and access to contraceptives, they have been reduced as soon as the resources they had to be allocated for the COVID-19 crisis. So I'll ask another question. Dr. Pathania, she also mentioned the statistics that according to WHO, the majority of those on the front lines of the pandemic are women, as they make up 70% of all health and social services staff globally. What is more disheartening is that they're paid much less than what a man makes. It has become extremely difficult for such working women who also assume the primary responsibility for household work. This includes caring for an infected family member, which exposes them to higher risk, both physically as well as financially. How can we ensure that the future we all seem to share at the moment is one built on solidarity and partnership? Mr. Nayak, would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you had directed that to somebody. So I think what we need, we need an overhaul of our health systems. Unfortunately, our health systems are not working for either health workers, whether they are doctors or ASHA workers and ANMs or nurses. And they are sadly also not working for patients who are accessing these services. In the context of maternal health and reproductive health, there have been a lot of issues that have led to women not being able to access services, and also healthcare workers not being able to provide services with the kind of support that they require. So, there were a lot of reports early on that started during the lockdown, where nurses were saying that even when personal protective equipment, that is PPE, was coming into a hospital, a lot of that was being distributed among the doctors, and the nurses, even those who were posted at COVID wards, were not getting so, or they were getting the PPE that was not up to the quality mark. So I think so we require, then the second thing that nurses have been complaining about is that that they don't get access to hostels and hotels the same way that other more senior staff members do, and this greatly impacts how much the kind of services that they can provide, because they need to travel from home, and then when they go home they have that psychological stress that we may end up infecting our family members, and unfortunately we have also seen repeatedly that health workers who are falling ill are not always getting the kind of care that they require. And when health workers have raised their voice against, not being allowed to quarantine, not being treated. I mean, in Delhi recently, there were a couple of nurses who work in a private hospital who were handed a bill by the hospital because they had got COVID and they had been treated for COVID, and they had got COVID because they were working in a COVID ward. There were 84 nurses from another private hospital in Delhi who were recently laid off because they were demanding PPE, they were demanding better working hours, and they were demanding more protection. So I think we really need to gear our health systems to the first thing that we need to do is we need more financing. The current spending on health as a percentage of GDP in India is abysmally low. I think when WHO mandates something like 2.5 to 5%, we spend barely 1 to 2%. So I think that's something that definitely needs to go up. In terms of unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, and maternal deaths, these have largely happened because our disaster management plans don't include RCH services as something that need to be continued when there is a disaster that's happening. So I think that's also something that we really need. Our disaster management plans need to include continuity of these services. We need to map and assess preparedness of facilities. We need to map availability of services, and we need services that reach women directly in the communities.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
It looks like no one has anything to add to what Inayat just said. So moving on, the next question is for you, Vipasha. Since just about everything is divided on the basis of gender, just a moment here. The stand-up community is no different. Female stand-up comics have a far more difficult ride in the industry than their male counterparts. This industry is mostly male-dominated. Even the audiences seem to be more accepting of men being funny, but female comedians have to be twice as funny and a little more careful. Keeping in mind that performing live in front of an audience is something which won't happen anytime soon, do you think that the internet offers a level playing field?
Yeah, I would like to answer that question with an example of an incident that happened very recently with one of the female stand-up comedians in our fraternity. So as you have mentioned, it's already really hard for us to go about doing live performances and to be accepted as being equally funny to our male counterparts. It's really hard, and it's actually even not just from the audience but even from the male comedians. We get a lot of criticism constantly, and we're always mansplained on how to go about things when we never even asked for it. And it's already difficult that ways, but something that happened recently and was very outrageous was that there's this female comedian who joked about a statue of Shivaji Chhatrapati Maharaj that was going to be built in Bombay. So now she is not really joking about Shivaji Maharaj. She is not even joking about the statue. She was joking about the answers that were given on Quora about that statue. Like, this statue will have like how people exaggerate on anything that the Indian government is coming up with. Like, if you remember when the new notes were coming up after demonetization, people were joking that this will have a GPS chip and tracker and all of that, right? So on Quora, which is a question answer website, people were assuming what all benefits will the statue have, and in our culture we have this habit of like exaggerating every little invention that we make, and that's sort of the job of the IT cells of the particular government who are. So anyway, so she was just mentioning the answers that she read on Quora, which said that the statue will have LED lights and everything. And it was pretty clear that this was not meant in a serious context, and this wasn't even about Chhatrapati Shivaji. And now, 2 years later, 2 years after the stand-up clip has been released on YouTube, suddenly some people come across that clip and they are really offended. And so instead of just expressing their offense or taking matters to the law, they decide to take matters in their own hands, and they attack her with rape threats, with death threats. She has received a video of this guy called Shubham Badass, who is saying that he will rape her and her mother. And basically that's her whole like she is under attack from this whole community of people. Not just that, apart from that, the venue where she performed, Indie Habitat, those guys went to the venue and they broke down the space. So as you know, in lockdown it is really hard for any sort of restaurant or club to anyway survive, and then to have such damage done to your property. It's even harder for these art spaces to uh, yeah so it's even harder for these art spaces to survive in such a time. So then again, I do not feel that even online even online we have our different sort of challenges, and it's like, again, our gender is apparently the first thing that people see, apart from anything else that we're trying to do. So leave alone her incident, something that happened with me as well very recently was about when TikTok got banned. I tried joking about it, and then people started taking offense in the wrong context. Like, I wasn't even joking. Like, they understood my video, and then they started calling me an anti-national, and then came the rape threats and death threats. So apparently, like, it's hard for both, definitely for male comedians and female comedians. But at the same time, when you're a female comedian, you're like at the receiving end of rape threats as well, and you're reduced to like a piece of flesh, basically. So yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Vitasha, ma'am. Next up, we have a few questions from the viewers that they would like you to answer. So it's an open session here. We'll start with a question from Samra. Samra says there is a disparity in terms of role division between the genders in families. But doesn't the average temperamental difference between the genders explain this disparity, even though it isn't fair? I'll repeat the question once more. Question from Samra Noor. There is a disparity in terms of role division between the genders in families. But doesn't the average temperamental difference between the genders explain this disparity, even though it isn't fair? Yes, Dr. Harshita.
Yeah, so with regards to whether the average temperament justifies this or not, I think the answer is no. Any aggressive form of behavior which impacts the other negatively cannot be justified on whatever grounds whatsoever. How this happens, I'll possibly give the explanation, which is more psychological in nature, for this sort of this as being normalized, is because what happens is that how we express emotions, how mature are we in expressing emotions, the channels we utilize, the language we utilize in expressing emotions, the tone, temperament, all of that, that is at the base of all of this. It may so happen, like in the initial discussion, we were talking about certain traits that are viewed as more gender specific. So from years together, certain traits, being aggressive, being a go-getter, being enthusiastic, being more passionate, being more fiery, all these traits were associated more with a particular gender and not with the other. And for the other, of course, it would be taken in the wrong sense. But then the root of it is, in my understanding as a psychologist, it's just about dysfunctional ways of expressing emotions. So whether it's a woman who's expressing emotions in a non-productive, not a very mature way, or whether it's a man, I think it's not justified. And what we try to see as justified or not, again, needs to be viewed from the lens of what is the dominant discourse. So naturally, for the longest time, the dominant discourse has been from the patriarchal side. So to the extent that even researches, what would be published, what would be not, what would not be published in researches in the scientific forums, was also decided by men. And you will be surprised to know there were studies which explored these aspects, whether there is actually a gender difference between or difference between the sexes in terms of certain emotions that are higher with one gender vis-a-vis the other, or there are certain brain regions, as certain researchers claim, which are more active in one gender while not so active in the other. But you'll be surprised to know that these researches again were controlled by men, and it has happened from time immemorial. So the studies which would show that there are actually no differences scientifically to prove that there is any difference that you can attribute to one's gender or sex basically, in terms of temperament, emotions, and certain skills. Those researches were not specifically released in the public domain. And only the ones who would somewhere claim that, okay, there is a slight but maybe a non-significant difference, that they would be allowed to go into the public forum. So I don't think anything can justify bad behavior, and we really need to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harshita. Ms. Kakkar, is there anything you would like to add here?
Yeah, I just want to add that, I completely concur with what Dr. Harshita has said. These differences are not so much on the basis of our biology as they are on the basis of socialization. Women are taught to be a certain way, men are taught to be a certain way. Unfortunately, these stereotypes are equally harmful for both. We see a rise in the number of suicides among men. We see an increase in mental health issues among men, and I think this is also largely because men are taught that you can't show emotions, that you can't that you have to be strong, and that being strong is all about bottling up emotions rather than learning how to communicate and express. So I don't think that biology has as much of a role to play as socialization. Regarding the second question, can I speak about that?
Let me just yeah. So we have another question from a viewer. Vineet Sagar asks, now that companies are okay to have employees working from homes, do you think women workforce participation will go up, or women are still going to be restricted to household work by their families?
Thank you. So to this, I just want to say that, what we're seeing right now is that it is becoming harder for women to work. I mean, one, there is a blurring of boundaries, right? I mean, earlier there was a 9 to 5 work day, but right now there's no 9 to 5. I mean, you are just expected to be free the entire time because you're sitting at home. I work, in the academic space, and over there, there are statistics that show that the number of publications, like academic publications, that have been submitted to journals has actually gone down in terms of the number of submissions that women are facing. So women are actually publishing less, and this is a direct consequence of the fact that women are expected to take on a greater share of household responsibilities. Um, I read an article today which also sort of blew my mind, because the article talked about how sexual harassment has found its way onto online spaces, and how women are being harassed and cyberbullied online by colleagues. There are people who are taking screenshots are being circulated. There are bosses who are making all sorts of weird demands on women, asking them to turn on their video call at different times of the day. So unfortunately, although our platforms have gone online, because of the way we are as a society, these problems have not ended. In the article, there was also mention of one of the women who was harassed, and who was harassed to the extent by her boss that she ended up quitting. And when we think about sexual harassment, we don't usually realize that this is something that can happen even in online spaces where there is no scope of any physical contact. So I think the challenges for women will continue. These challenges will morph into new ways, and I don't think that these issues will go away unless they are specifically addressed.
Vipasha, is there anything you would like to add?
Yes. So I would just like to add to what Inayat said just now, that even though there is a better scope for us to be online rather than, actually being. So as you know, even stand-up comedy shows, they used to be organized late at night, and it was a huge restriction for a lot of women that they couldn't step out at that time. So now we do have the freedom to attend all these Zoom shows, and to be active online, and to put our art out there. But at the same time, even in these live Zoom shows, we have guys messaging us like really harassing and violating messages a lot of times. So it's almost like, even though we have the exposure now, even though we have the equal opportunity, but at the same time we also have to face the harassment and the abuse, because apparently it's much more easier to kind of violate someone through the screen for some reason.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pasha. We will wrap up the session now. We apologize that we are not able to take up all your questions. We are bound by time. We have to start with the closing ceremony as well. To all the panelists, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to share your valuable thoughts with us.
I just want to add, sorry,
yes,
I just want to bring out one statistics in flat 1 minute. What we have been noticing in our schools, in admissions and all, there will be very few admissions in the lower classes. I am expecting a whole lot of homeschooling also to start. So there is an added problem which is going to get added to couples, and they got to decide who takes this role of bringing up the children, because the COVID problems and the fear that is attached with it, whole lot of children have taken admission and taken withdrawals, especially in the kindergarten and classes till class 1 and 2, which means that probably couples are considering homeschooling. So where will this responsibility come in, on whose shoulders, whether it's again women will be doing more or it's men will take on this task, is what I'm just leaving a question before we wind up. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Ms. Srishti, would you like to add something?
I just feel that this work from home model will actually help more women to join back work and maybe continue working, and more women will be inclined of working because they can manage their responsibilities with work. So that's a short answer. I feel yes, it might just be one of the positives of the quarantine model.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for taking the time. to share your valuable thoughts with us. I am sure that your advice and viewpoints will help a lot of our youngsters circumvent future challenges. Thank you so much once again. I now hand over the mic to Ms. Jasleen. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, everybody. Believe me when I say that it was truly an honor being a part of such informative and highly inspiring discussion today. On behalf of the entire QVS family, I would like to sincerely thank each one of you for giving us your valuable time. Thank you so very much. And to all our viewers, you are requested to please join us for the closing ceremony that will be streamed live on Behest YouTube channel at 7 p.m. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today.